Hey, what you reading for?
The queen of creepy dolls, naked children running around Manhattan killing people, and a murder mystery with werewolf overtones. This is 1983, the year in horror.
Don't forget to breathe!
Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel where I talk about books, literary horror classics, and contemporary. Today, the fourth installment in my 10-part retrospective of horror from the 1980s. Was horror in the 1980s good? I don't know. At that time, I was too busy breakdancing with my b-boy crew, popping and locking and busting moves like the wave and the caterpillar. So I missed the whole horror scene of that decade. So in this video retrospective, what I'm doing is I'm going year to year, picking out 3 titles that look intriguing or look to be important. And I'm reading them with fresh eyes, and then I report back to you with my honest opinions. If you've seen any of the other installments of this 1980s horror retrospective, you'll know that it has been quite hit or miss. And when it misses badly. But there have been a few gems, and that's really what I'm looking for. If you're new here, consider subscribing. The growth of the channel, that's what keeps me motivated. That keeps me putting out new content, and I do appreciate the support. We'll start this exploration of horror from the 1980s with a short montage of cool book covers of horror released in 1983, featuring the music of the great Polish composer Henryk Górecki, and I'll see you on the other side to talk books. 1983, Every Breath You Take by The Police was the #1 song, Thriller by Michael Jackson was the #1 album, and Return of the Jedi was the #1 movie. 1983 was a good year for technology. We saw the launch of the compact disc, or CD as the kids call it. We also continued the craze of food-based video games with the release of Food Fight. '83 was a complicated year for gender equality. On the one hand, we had the first woman astronaut go to space, which was good. On the other hand, when she returned to Earth, she was made to answer questions about her weight. Not good.
Well, up in space, we're weightless. We would just float right up off the stairs. I could take something, I could take a ball and just let it go right here, and it wouldn't fall. It would just stay right where I put it.
Does it feel like a balloon?
In horror movies, 1983 gave us 3 Stephen King movie adaptations, Cujo, Christine, and The Dead Zone. We also had the release of one of my favorite movies of all time, David Cronenberg's Videodrome. But what about horror books? In very 1983 fashion, I decided to check out the Queen of Creepy Dolls, Ruby Jean Jensen. I read Mama. I say very 1983 fashion because 1983 in the United States was a year when dolls caused people to lose their minds.
They're one of a kind, they're Cabbage Patch Kids, you can give them all of your life.
They're manufacturing about 200,000 a week in Asia and chartering planes to get them to stores in the United States. But demand exceeds supply.
Mama tells the story of a family, husband, wife, one son, one older daughter, and one younger 5-year-old daughter. The story begins with the husband. He dies of cancer. So the widow, she takes her family and she moves them back to her childhood home, a home that her parents are trying to sell, which allows them to escape the sad memories of their city home, and also allows them to live rent-free, which is important because all of a sudden money becomes tight, right? Now this home, it has an attic, and the attic is filled with old toys from previous generations of kids. And the younger daughter, she's a bit of a loner, and she prefers to spend all of her time in the attic playing with her toys and discovering all these old dolls and breathing life back into them. Now, you would think that the dolls would be grateful to have life breathed into them. It turns out that the dolls are not grateful. In fact, the dolls are kind of greedy, actually, and they just want more of that child's breath. So at night, they sneak out of the attic and they climb down the stairs and they go into the little girl's room and looking for more of that sweet, sweet little girl breath. This book is pretty tame in terms of horror. I did like the characters. I liked the family, all the kids. They're all different and they're all well fleshed out. Plus there's a subplot with the woman and a neighbor who is a widower, and he takes an interest in the family. He takes an interest in the woman. He finds her attractive, and she is attracted to him as well, but she feels guilty about it, which creates an interesting dynamic, and I thought that was well done. But I read this book because I wanted a killer doll. And yes, technically, I did get a doll that comes to life. And yes, the doll, or several dolls actually, yes, they have murderous intentions. But we have to wait quite a while for that to happen. And when it does happen, there aren't really that many scenes featuring these killer toys. So I'm reading this book and I'm enjoying it, but at the same time I'm saying, I want my doll. I was promised a doll. Yeah, technically, I guess I did get a doll, but I want to spend more time with my doll. Ultimately, I was a bit underwhelmed. The story is well told, it's well written. I did enjoy it, but it's quite tame in the horror aspect, and there just wasn't enough creepy doll for a creepy doll story. Here's the blurb for Mama. Once upon a time there lived a sweet little dolly. Her porcelain-like face was so smooth, just like a baby. Her mouth even had a tiny hole so she could eat and breathe. But her one beaded glass eye gleamed with mischief and evil. She had waited a long time in the attic for someone to set her free. Once upon a time there lived a sweet little girl. The only place she was happy was in the attic with her dolly. If she could have seen her little doll's legs kick, she would have been frightened. If she had felt her little doll's arms squeeze, she would have been shocked. But if she could have read her little doll's thoughts, she would have run from the attic forever. For the sweet little dolly only had killing on her mind. Though I did like the book, I was not able to give it 5 stars. I do want to be positive on this channel, so I'd like to read an extract of a 5-star review I found on Goodreads. For how little blood is spilled and how sporadic the doll horror is, or more accurately, the general toys horror, I got totally sucked into the characters and the eerie atmosphere. The best kind of horror stories use the supernatural as a projection of real-world horrors we all face, and in this case, it was grief and the uncomfortable process of letting go of the past when the past isn't done with you. The mythology of the antique toys from hell is never built up or explained, aside from a reference to a great-grandmother that warned never to play in the attic, but there seems to be a message of losing yourself in nostalgic memory or the inability to accept death, both leading to destruction. This was my first Ruby Jean Jensen experience, and I probably won't be reading any of her other books, although her books do have really cool covers. And Chain Letter from 1987 does look promising. But there just wasn't enough in Mama to have me coming back for more. Next up, I read The Children of the Island by T.M. Wright. This is part 3 of the Strange Seed trilogy, but I gathered from reviews that I checked out that it could work just as well as a standalone, which I concur. Strange Seed is about children who are birthed from the mud of the earth, and they are able to mimic human behavior, and they're able to read human thoughts and human emotions. And their primary objective is to survive, which means either they have to assimilate or kill, or both. I read one review of this book which qualified it as Strange Seed Takes Manhattan. It is a short book, around 250 pages, and it's written in a vignette style where we jump from scene to scene, or often the scenes are little more than a few paragraphs or at most a few pages. And the book is sprinkled with news reports and transcriptions of medical reports. So with this style of storytelling, it's quite difficult to create something that is immersive. I was never really able to get into the story. There were passages that I thought were interesting and compelling, especially the passages where we are in the POV of the children creatures. Those were quite interesting. And although it has a relatively high body count, there's no gore and there isn't really much in the way of description of the violence. In fact, what will happen is a character will turn around and he'll see the face of the child, and that will be the last thing he sees. And then we jump to another scene. So the deaths occur kind of like that very quickly. Which for a horror book, I want a little bit of blood, you know? I don't feel like I got my blood. I got plenty of naked children, but not blood. It's not bad, but it's not memorable either, and I can't really recommend it, and I don't intend on reading any of the other entries to this series, even if the first one, 1978 Strange Seed, was nominated for a World Fantasy Award. I'll pass. I'll be honest with you, I had a very difficult time finding 3 titles that appealed to me for this installment of the 1980s retrospective. For some years, I'm offered many titles to choose from that look compelling, but 1983, for me, I found slim pickings. I tried to read Joyride by Stephen Sire, I want to say. Joyride was presented as a classic 1980s slasher. I read 2 chapters and then I had to abandon it. The writing was just too weak, too sloppy. Now, when I DNF a book because of sloppy writing or weak writing, More often than not, what I mean is an overuse of present participle clauses, which drive me crazy. If you're not sure what I mean by a present participle clause, I'll give you an example. He says, keeping his eyes on the camera, hoping they understand what he means, suspecting that they understand from this example. Okay, that was admittedly not great. I'd like to read an extract from Joyride to give you a clear idea of what I'm talking about, the kind of writing that drives me absolutely mad. Wrapping his fingers around the back of Priscilla's delicate white hand, he insisted, "Come on." "All right," she said with feigned exasperation. "Where are you two going?" Eddie inquired with a tinge of jealousy, popping open his second can of beer as Bobby and Priscilla crept towards the seclusion of the family crypts. "For a walk," Bobby replied, tersely over his shoulder, ushering Priscilla through the towering marble pillars of the Grabowski Mausoleum. "That Bobby's a real pig," Loop observed with no particular expression, sucking the last of her beer from the upturned container. Seizing the moment when the focus was on the departing twosome, Twinkie eased his portly frame off the bench and quietly slipped across the dead lawn to the rear of the Cutlass. He wedged his hand into the back pocket of his faded Levi's and removed a book of matches and a small package wrapped in tissue, which he tore open in a flurry. Crouching beside the wheel of the car, he struck the match and raised it to the dangling fuse of the Red Devil firecrackers. Tossing them to the ground, he hustled back to his friends with his 4 fingers stuck in his ears, plopped down on the ground, and waited for the show to begin. So you can't strike the match and at the same time throw the firecrackers down. It's just sloppy writing and it's very ugly. If you were not bothered or annoyed by the passage I just read, I envy you. As a reader, there are so many more books that are available to you than they are available to me. If you are a writer, when it comes to present participle clauses, take a lesson from 1983. So after my failed attempt with Joyride, I was willing to try anything, and I happened upon The House of the Wolf by Basil Copper. I'll admit that the cover did not look promising, but Basil Copper was a name that I'd heard before. Basil Copper is perhaps best known for his contribution to Solar Pons stories. Solar Pons was is a detective, like a Sherlock Holmes inspired detective, created by August Derleth. Basil Copper, he took the reins of this character from August Derleth and he continued writing stories for him. And some of the stories veer into the occult detective genre because some of the stories share a universe with August Derleth's contemporary and good friend H.P. Lovecraft. The House of the Wolf is a classic gothic murder mystery with werewolf overtones. We begin with a carriage ride in the rain through the Hungarian countryside, not unlike Dracula, where the protagonist, who is an academic expert in werewolves, he's being taken to the castle where the Count is bringing together all these experts in different fields of folklore and legends. He's bringing them to his castle for an informal congress. The castle is enormous with plenty of dark secret passageways and dark family secrets. And the Count also has an attractive, seductive daughter. So that's nice. With The House of the Wolf, we are in familiar territory. There is really no effort made to be inventive or to create anything new in the horror world. We are playing with familiar tropes, familiar settings, familiar characterizations. And there is something that is fun and charming about treading these tropes. And it's competently done. I say competently done. It was a good read. It was a fun read. But there were two annoying details that I have to tell you about. I have to get it off my chest. For some reason, this writer, Basil Copper, he constantly has his characters sigh as a dialogue tag, right? How was your trip? He asked him, and he sighed and said it was fine. Like often, like more often than I think, I'm not exaggerating. There's probably 40 to 50 instances of a character sighing, which is just kind of weird and distracting. Also, the story is set in Hungary, just outside of Budapest, my former home. And the writer makes frequent references to Hungary being in Eastern Europe with phrases like, oh, these strange Eastern European customs. When Hungary is not in Eastern Europe, Hungary is firmly in Central Europe. And I lived there long enough to know that this type of geographical mistake is not appreciated by the people, by the Central European people of Hungary. It's not a big deal, but it's kind of odd that you would find these kinds of mistakes in a book, I guess. Other than that, competently written. He didn't make really good use of the setting. I mean, it's called Hungary, but I suspect that the author has probably never been to Hungary. In fact, there are many scenes in which the characters enjoy a nice meal, which I don't think ever happens in Hungary. But the castle is gorgeous, and I thought he did a great job taking advantage of that setting. There is a little bit of sexual tension between the protagonist and the Count's seductive younger daughter, but I wish he had turned that sexual tension up a notch or two. I mean, this is 1983 Basil. I mean, you can go for it, you know? But as a murder mystery, which is what this book is, I think it works very well. There's a decent body count and enough werewolf overtones to satisfy the horror aspect, although it is really a murder mystery. There's a fun twist at the end, which nothing groundbreaking, but it works. It's fun. I had a good time with this book. For a super tropey, familiar setting kind of book, I think The House of the Wolf works really well. I had fun with it. I enjoyed it. If I were more a fan of murder mysteries, I would definitely go on to read more books by Basil Copper, but I'm not really much of a fan of murder mysteries. So while I did enjoy The House of the Wolf, I'm perfectly happy to leave it at that. In my quest to discover horror gems from the 1980s, I would not consider my exploration of 1983 to be a success. I read 3 authors I hadn't read before, Ruby Jean Jensen, Basil Copper, and T.M. Wright. I do not plan on reading any more books from those authors, but I liked all 3 of them to an extent. But I can tell you that things do pick up significantly in 1984, so I do hope you will stick with me through this 1980s horror experiment. And if you haven't done so already, go ahead and hit those like and subscribe buttons. Do you have any experience with any of the books or authors I talked about in this video? Do you have any recommendations as to where I can get my killer doll fix? Have you ever heard of anyone enjoying a meal in Hungary? I suppose that could happen. Although I lived there for 6 years and I don't remember having any positive food experiences, with the notable exception of the hummus bar. I love that restaurant. What do you remember about 1983? Did you give all your love to a Cabbage Patch doll, or do you still have more love to give? Did you learn how to just say no? I always love hearing from you and reading your comments. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in 1984.
Now there are even more ways to care for your Cabbage Patch Kids. There are Cabbage Patch Kid table mates so your kid can join you for meals. Cabbage Patch travel bags for visiting the rest of the family. Automatic musical swings for just relaxing at home. And even Cabbage Patch Kid 3-in-1 prams that turn into travel beds.
They're one of a kind, they're Cabbage Patch Kids. You can give them all of your life.
On with the new flesh.